The morning sunlight filtered through my kitchen window as I watched my 5-year-old son Michael carefully arrange his dinosaur toys on the breakfast table. His concentration was absolute, each prehistoric creature placed with meticulous precision, according to a system only he understood. This was my world, these quiet morning moments with my beautiful boy, who saw the world through a different lens than most. Michael had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when he was 3, and while the journey hadn't always been easy, I wouldn't change a single thing about my extraordinary child. Looking back now, I realized the signs were there from the beginning. The way my mother would purse her lips whenever Michael didn't make eye contact with her. The subtle comments about how children in her day were different, more obedient, more normal. But she was my mother, the woman who had raised me, who had been there through my divorce when Michael's father decided that a special needs child wasn't part of his life plan. I needed her support, craved it even, especially during those early days when I was drowning in therapy appointments and specialist consultations. The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was subtle. So subtle I almost dismissed it. Michael had always been a picky eater, a common trait among children on the spectrum, but he had his safe foods that he would reliably consume. Chicken nuggets cut into perfect squares, pasta with butter but no sauce, apple slices arranged in a semicircle on his special blue plate. But that Tuesday morning in October, he pushed away his favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with exactly 3 shakes of salt, and complained that his tummy hurt. "Sweetheart, does your tummy feel sick?" I asked, kneeling beside his chair to be at eye level with him. Michael didn't like direct questions when he was upset, so I kept my voice soft and avoided demanding an immediate answer. He shook his head, then nodded, then began to rock slightly in his chair, a self-soothing behavior that told me he was genuinely distressed. The thing about having a child with autism is that you become a detective, constantly analyzing behaviors and patterns to understand what they can't always communicate with words. I called his pediatrician's office, explaining Michael's symptoms to the nurse who answered. She listened patiently as I described the stomach pain, the refusal to eat, the slight pallor I thought I detected in his usually rosy cheeks. "Has there been any change in his routine?" she asked, and I could hear the subtle dismissal in her voice. Children with autism often have physical symptoms related to anxiety or changes in their environment. I wanted to scream that I knew my child, that I could tell the difference between his anxiety responses and actual physical distress. But I kept my voice level as I insisted on an appointment. Dr. Harrison saw us that afternoon, and I watched as he performed a perfunctory examination. Michael, overwhelmed by the clinical environment and the invasion of his personal space, had a meltdown in the exam room, screaming and flailing when the doctor tried to palpate his abdomen. "You see," Dr. Harrison said, as if Michael's reaction proved his point, "this is clearly behavioral. Many children on the spectrum have sensory issues that manifest as physical complaints. I'd recommend continuing with his occupational therapy and perhaps consulting with his behavioral therapist." I left that appointment feeling frustrated and unheard, a feeling that would become all too familiar in the coming weeks. But when I called my mother to vent about the experience, she was surprisingly supportive. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice warm with sympathy, "I can see how much pain Michael is in. These doctors just don't understand our special boy. Why don't you let me help? I've been researching some natural approaches that might ease his discomfort." My mother, Patricia, had always been interested in alternative medicine. Her bathroom cabinet was filled with essential oils and herbal supplements, and she swore by acupuncture for her arthritis. While I personally preferred evidence-based medicine, I had to admit that some of her remedies had helped me in the past. The lavender oil she gave me during my stressful divorce had helped me sleep, and the ginger tea she made definitely settled my stomach during a bad flu. So when she offered to help with Michael, suggesting gentle, natural approaches, I didn't see the harm. "I've joined this wonderful online community," she told me one evening as we sat in my living room, Michael playing quietly with his tablet in the corner. "It's full of parents and grandparents who are finding real solutions for children with special needs, not just managing symptoms, but actually helping them heal." The word heal should have been my first red flag. Autism isn't something that needs healing. It's a neurological difference, not a disease. But I was exhausted, worried about Michael's continuing symptoms, and desperate for any kind of support. My mother began babysitting more frequently, offering to take Michael for afternoons so I could work without interruption. As a freelance graphic designer, I worked from home, which allowed me to be there for Michael's needs, but also meant I was constantly juggling deadlines with his care. Having my mother's help felt like a lifeline. She would pick him up after his morning therapy sessions, and I would collect him in the evening, grateful for the uninterrupted hours to focus on my clients. At first, the changes were positive. Michael seemed calmer after his afternoons with Grandma. He would come home with stories about the special games they played, the breathing exercises she taught him, the yummy teas she made. "Grandma's tea is magic," he told me one evening, his eyes bright with excitement. It warmed my heart to see him bonding with my mother, especially since social connections were often challenging for him. But then came the day that everything began to unravel. It was a Thursday, unseasonably warm for November, and I had been racing to finish a major project for a client. When my mother brought Michael home that evening, I immediately noticed something was off. His usual bouncing energy was replaced by a sluggish shuffle, and his face looked drawn and pale. But what caught my attention most was the water bottle clutched in his small hands, filled with what appeared to be murky black liquid. "Michael, honey, what are you drinking?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light and curious rather than worried. His reaction was immediate and intense. "No!" he screamed, clutching the bottle to his chest and running to his room. The door slam echoed through our small house, and I stood there, stunned by the intensity of his response. Michael had meltdowns, certainly, but this felt different. This felt like fear. I turned to my mother, who was gathering her purse with practiced calm. "Mom, what's in the water bottle?" I asked, trying to mirror her casual demeanor. She laughed, a bright tinkling sound that suddenly seemed forced. "Oh, you know how he is about Halloween," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "We were making special Halloween cupcakes for his class, and he absolutely insisted on putting black food coloring in his water. You know I don't like artificial dyes, but sometimes you have to pick your battles with these special ones." The explanation made sense. Michael did love Halloween, and he could be incredibly persistent about his preferences. I had once spent 45 minutes in a grocery store because he needed a specific shade of orange juice that matched his mental image perfectly. So I pushed down my unease and thanked my mother for watching him, making a mental note to talk to Michael about food coloring when he was calmer. Over the next few days, Michael's condition deteriorated rapidly. The stomach pains that had started weeks ago intensified, and he began experiencing fatigue so severe that he could barely make it through his morning therapy sessions. His occupational therapist pulled me aside after one particularly difficult session. "Sarah," she said gently, "I'm concerned about Michael. He's not himself. His energy is extremely low, and he's struggling with activities he normally enjoys. Have you taken him back to the doctor?" I had, multiple times. Each visit ended the same way, with doctors attributing his symptoms to his autism, to anxiety, to behavioral issues. One particularly dismissive physician suggested that I might be projecting my own anxieties onto Michael, implying that I was somehow making him sick with my worry. I left that appointment in tears, feeling like I was failing my child, while the medical establishment watched with judgment rather than concern. The only person who seemed to take my concerns seriously was my mother. She researched Michael's symptoms extensively, sharing articles from her online groups about children with similar issues. She increased her babysitting offers, suggesting that maybe I was too stressed and that my anxiety was affecting Michael. "Let me take some of the burden," she said, her eyes soft with concern. "I have more experience with children, and maybe a grandmother's touch is what he needs right now." Desperate and exhausted, I agreed. I started letting her take Michael 3 or 4 afternoons a week, using the time to research his symptoms myself, to call specialists in other cities, to do anything I could to find answers. I implemented a strict elimination diet, carefully documenting everything Michael ate and any reactions he had. I spent hundreds of dollars on organic, allergen-free foods, hoping that maybe it was something environmental causing his distress. But nothing helped. In fact, Michael seemed to get worse after his afternoons with my mother, though she assured me it was just coincidence. "He's probably just tired from playing," she would say when I mentioned his increased lethargy. "We do a lot of activities together. He's building up his strength." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe that someone, anyone, was helping my baby. The physical changes became impossible to ignore. Michael's beautiful dark hair, which had always been thick and slightly unruly, began falling out in clumps. I would find handfuls of it on his pillow each morning, and running my fingers through his hair during bath time resulted in a heartbreaking amount of loss. His skin took on a greyish pallor that made him look like a ghost of himself. The pediatric scale at home showed he had lost 15 pounds in just 2 weeks, a devastating amount for a child who was already small for his age. I documented everything obsessively, taking photos of his physical changes, keeping detailed logs of his symptoms, convinced that if I just collected enough evidence, someone would finally take us seriously. My phone became filled with heartbreaking images of my declining child, his eyes growing larger in his increasingly gaunt face, his smile becoming rarer with each passing day. The night that changed everything started like so many others. I had made Michael's new safe meal, plain rice with boiled chicken, cut into the exact size pieces he preferred. He managed 3 bites before pushing the plate away, and I didn't have the heart to encourage him to eat more. His little body seemed to be shutting down, and forcing food felt cruel. I helped him into his dinosaur pajamas, noticing how they hung loosely on his shrinking frame, and tucked him into bed with his favorite stuffed T-Rex. I had taken to sleeping on a mattress on his floor, too anxious to be separated from him by even the width of our small hallway. This particular night, I dozed fitfully, waking every time Michael shifted or made a sound. Around midnight, I heard him sit up in bed and reach for his ever-present water bottle. The soft sucking sound as he drank was followed by a strange silence. Then I heard the bottle hit the floor with a dull thud. The sound was wrong, all wrong. I shot up from my makeshift bed to see Michael collapsed against his pillows, his small body limp and unresponsive. "Michael! Michael, baby, wake up!" I screamed, gathering him into my arms. His pulse fluttered weakly under my searching fingers, and his skin felt cold and clammy. I managed to dial 911 with shaking hands while cradling him against my chest, his dead weight terrifying in its stillness. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and medical terminology I couldn't process. I held Michael's hand as the paramedics worked, whispering promises I desperately hoped I could keep. "Mummy's here, baby. Mummy's got you. You're going to be okay. Just hold on for me, sweetheart. Just hold on." His fingers were so cold in mine, and I rubbed them frantically, trying to warm them with my love alone. At the hospital, they whisked Michael away from me, and I was left in a sterile waiting room that smelled of disinfectant and fear. I called my mother with trembling fingers, barely able to form words through my sobs. "He collapsed, Mom. Michael collapsed. They don't know what's wrong. I'm so scared." She arrived within 20 minutes, still in her nightgown with a coat thrown over it, and held me while I fell apart. The next hours were the longest of my life. Doctors came and went with updates that weren't really updates, just medical speak for, "We're trying to figure out what's wrong with your son." They ran test after test, drew what seemed like endless vials of blood from his tiny arms, hooked him up to machines that beeped and hummed with artificial life. It was during one of these waiting periods that the social worker appeared. Amanda Carlson, according to her hospital badge, with kind eyes that didn't quite mask the suspicion underneath. She asked me to step into a small consultation room, and I knew immediately that this wasn't just about medical history. "I need to ask you some questions about Michael's care," she said, her voice professionally neutral. "Can you tell me why you didn't seek medical attention sooner for his symptoms?" The question felt like a physical blow. I explained about the multiple doctor visits, the dismissals, the attributions to autism. I showed her photos on my phone of the documentation I'd kept, the symptom journals, the evidence of my desperate attempts to get help. She nodded, taking notes, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Have you been giving Michael any medications or supplements not prescribed by his doctor?" she asked. "Is there anyone else who has regular, unsupervised access to him?" The implications of her questions made me feel sick. They thought I had done this. They thought I had somehow hurt my baby. "Just my mother," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "She babysits him a few afternoons a week, but she would never. She loves Michael." Amanda made more notes, her face giving nothing away. "We have to explore all possibilities," she said. "I'm sure you understand." After what felt like hours of questions, I was finally allowed to see Michael. He lay in the pediatric ICU, looking impossibly small in the hospital bed. Machines surrounded him, monitoring his vital signs, delivering fluids and nutrients through IVs that seemed too large for his thin arms. A nurse was adjusting one of the monitors when I entered, and she gave me a sympathetic smile. "You can sit with him," she said softly. "Talk to him. We believe he can hear you, even if he can't respond right now." I pulled a chair close to his bed and took his hand, careful not to disturb the IV line. "Hey, baby boy," I whispered. "Mummy's here. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." The nurse, whose name tag read Jennifer, lingered in the room, checking readings that I suspected didn't really need checking. "He's stable," she assured me. "His body is very weak, but he's fighting. Kids are amazingly resilient." She paused, seeming to debate whether to say more. "The doctor will be in soon to discuss his condition, but I want you to know we're doing everything we can." As the hours crawled by, I maintained a constant stream of one-sided conversation with Michael. I told him about the dinosaurs we would visit at the museum when he was better, about the new documentary I had saved on our DVR about pterodactyls, about anything and everything I could think of to keep my voice steady and calm for him. My mother sat in the corner of the room, uncharacteristically quiet, occasionally stepping out to get coffee or make phone calls. Dr. Alia Patel arrived in the early afternoon, her white coat crisp and professional over colourful scrubs that seemed at odds with the gravity of the situation. She was younger than I expected, with kind, dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a way of speaking that was both direct and compassionate. "Mrs. Anderson," she began, pulling up a chair to sit at my level rather than standing over me, a gesture I appreciated. "I need to discuss Michael's test results with you." She pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of numbers and charts that meant nothing to me until she explained them. "Michael is severely malnourished." His blood work shows critical deficiencies in multiple essential nutrients: iron, calcium, magnesium, vitamin B12, zinc, all at dangerously low levels. His body has essentially been starving at the cellular level, despite the food he's been consuming.
But I don't understand,
I said, my voice breaking. I've been so careful with his diet. Everything organic, everything healthy. I have photos of every meal, every ingredient. I pulled out my phone, desperate to show her the evidence of my diligence, but she gently stopped me. This isn't about the food you've been providing, she said carefully. This level of depletion suggests something is actively preventing his body from absorbing nutrients. We need to investigate what that might be. She paused, studying my face. Has Michael been taking any supplements? Any vitamins or natural remedies? No, nothing, I said immediately. I don't give him anything without running it by his pediatrician first. My mother shifted in her chair and I glanced at her. She was staring at her hands, her face unreadable. A cold feeling began to creep up my spine. Dr. Patel noticed the interaction. What about when he's with other caregivers? She asked gently. Sometimes well-meaning family members might give children things they think are helpful. The room suddenly felt very small and airless. I turned to my mother, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom, I said, my voice barely audible. Have you been giving Michael something? She looked up then, her face defensive. Just some natural remedies, she said, her tone implying this should be obvious and acceptable. Nothing harmful, things to help with his condition. The word condition hit me like a slap. She meant his autism. She had been trying to cure his autism. What kind of remedies? Dr. Patel asked, her voice remaining professionally neutral despite the tension crackling in the room. My mother straightened in her chair, adopting what I recognized as her lecturing posture. Activated charcoal, she said proudly. It's a natural detoxifier. All the parents in my support group use it for their children. It helps remove the toxins that cause autism. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Patel's face went very still, and I saw Jennifer, who had been quietly checking monitors, freeze in place. How much activated charcoal? Dr. Patel asked, her voice now sharp with urgency. And for how long? My mother waved her hand dismissively. Oh, I don't know exactly. A teaspoon or two in his water. Every day he was with me. It's completely natural. You can buy it at any health food store. She turned to me, her expression earnest. I was helping him, Sarah. You saw how calm he was after our afternoons together. The charcoal was working. The room spun around me as the pieces fell into place. The black water, Michael's terror when I asked about it, the way he always seemed worse after spending time with my mother. She had been poisoning my child, and I had delivered him to her 3 or 4 times a week, grateful for the break. Activated charcoal absorbs everything, Dr. Patel explained, her words cutting through my spiral of guilt and horror. Including nutrients. In the amounts you're describing, it would prevent Michael's body from absorbing virtually anything nutritious from his food. He's been slowly starving to death. I stood up so fast the chair toppled backward. Get out, I said to my mother, my voice low and dangerous. Get out of this room right now. She stood, her face a mask of righteous indignation. Sarah, you're being dramatic. I was trying to help. Those doctors have been filling Michael with toxins for years, and I was finally getting them out of his system. The fact that he's here just proves how much poison was in his body. Get out, I screamed, and Jennifer quickly moved between us, gently but firmly guiding my mother toward the door. I'll have security escort her out, she murmured to me as my mother's protests faded down the hallway. I collapsed back into the chair beside Michael's bed, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. Dr. Patel gave me a moment to compose myself before speaking again. We need to contact the police, she said gently. This is medical child abuse, and we're mandated reporters. But right now, let's focus on Michael's treatment. We've started aggressive nutritional support through his IV. His body needs to slowly readjust to processing nutrients properly. It's going to be a long road, but children are remarkably resilient." The next days blurred together in a haze of police interviews, medical updates, and sleepless nights by Michael's bedside. Detectives came and went, taking statements, collecting evidence. They confiscated the water bottle I'd been carrying in my purse, Michael's comfort item that had actually been the weapon used against him. They interviewed my mother, who apparently remained convinced she had done nothing wrong, insisting to anyone who would listen that she was saving her grandson from the autism epidemic. I learned more about activated charcoal than I ever wanted to know. In small, controlled doses, it could be useful for certain types of poisoning, but given regularly, especially to a child, it was devastating. It bound to everything in the digestive system, good and bad, preventing absorption of vital nutrients. My mother had essentially been giving Michael a starvation diet, while I fed him the most nutritious meals I could manage. The social worker, Amanda, came by again, this time with a very different demeanor. "I owe you an apology," she said, sitting beside me in the family lounge while my ex-mother-in-law stayed with Michael. "When I first interviewed you, I suspected you might be responsible, but it's clear you did everything possible to help your son. I'm sorry you were failed by so many systems." I accepted her apology numbly. It didn't change anything. It didn't undo the months of medical gaslighting, the dismissals, the implications that I was an overanxious mother making my child sick. It didn't bring back the weight Michael had lost, or the hair that had fallen out, or the developmental progress that had stalled, while his body fought to survive. On the fourth day, Michael opened his eyes. I was reading to him from his favorite dinosaur book when I heard a small sound and looked up to see him watching me. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the tubes that had been down his throat. "Thirsty?" I broke down completely, pressing the call button frantically while sobbing with relief. Dr. Patel was there within minutes, checking Michael's responses, shining lights in his eyes, asking him simple questions that he answered with growing strength. "This is very encouraging," she told me, her professional mask slipping to show genuine joy. "His cognitive function appears intact. The next few days will tell us more about any lasting effects, but this is a very good sign." Michael's recovery was slow and sometimes heartbreaking. He had to relearn some fine motor skills that the malnutrition had stolen from him. His occupational therapist, the same one who had first noticed something was wrong, worked with him patiently, celebrating small victories like successfully using scissors or writing his name. He developed an intense fear of drinks that weren't water or milk, checking obsessively to make sure they were the right color. The legal process moved forward while we focused on healing. My mother was charged with aggravated child abuse and practicing medicine without a license. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had genuinely believed she was helping, that there was no criminal intent. But the prosecutor, a fierce woman named Diana Chen, who had a child with special needs herself, wasn't having it. "Ignorance is not an excuse when a child nearly dies," she told me during one of our meetings. "Your mother had access to the same information everyone else does. She chose to believe conspiracy theories over medical science, and she nearly killed your son in the process. We're going to make sure she's held accountable." The hardest part was explaining to Michael why he couldn't see Grandma anymore. His literal autism-influenced thinking struggled with the concept that someone who said they loved him had hurt him. "But Grandma gives hugs," he would say, confused. "People who give hugs don't hurt people." I worked with his therapist to find age-appropriate ways to explain that sometimes people who love us can still do harmful things, especially when they believe wrong information. The support group my mother had belonged to became part of the investigation. It turned out she wasn't the only grandparent or parent dosing children with dangerous amounts of supplements and natural cures. The group had been sharing increasingly extreme protocols, encouraging each other to ignore medical advice and increase dosages when children showed signs of decline, interpreting symptoms of poisoning as healing crises or detox reactions. 3 other children were hospitalized after the investigation expanded. One, a little girl named Emma, had been receiving industrial-grade hydrogen peroxide treatments that had severely damaged her digestive system. Another boy, just 3 years old, had been subjected to chelation therapy with substances bought online, causing kidney damage. The group's administrators were eventually charged with conspiracy to commit child abuse and practicing medicine without licenses. Hannah Martinez, an investigative journalist who had been following the rise of dangerous autism cures, contacted me through the prosecutor's office. She was working on a series of articles about medical misinformation targeting vulnerable families and wanted to include our story. At first, I declined. The idea of our private nightmare becoming public consumption felt like another violation. But then I thought about all the times I had searched online for answers about Michael's symptoms, desperate for any information that might help. What if another parent was out there right now, watching their child decline, being told by doctors that it was just autism, while a well-meaning relative slowly poisoned their baby? What if our story could be the thing that made them look closer, ask questions, potentially save a life? I agreed to the interview on the condition that Michael's identity be protected. We met at a quiet coffee shop while Michael was at school, and I told her everything. About the medical dismissals, the gaslighting, the desperate need for support that made me vulnerable to my mother's offers of help. About the guilt that still kept me up at night, wondering how I could have missed what was happening right in front of me. Hannah was compassionate but thorough, asking difficult questions about the balance between respecting alternative viewpoints and protecting vulnerable children. How do we address the fact that many families, especially those with special needs children, have legitimate grievances with the medical system? She asked. How do we acknowledge those failures while still preventing dangerous misinformation from taking hold? I didn't have easy answers. My own experience with dismissive doctors had made me more open to my mother's help than I might otherwise have been. The system that should have protected Michael had failed him long before my mother got her hands on that activated charcoal. But that didn't excuse what she had done, and it didn't change the fact that her actions had nearly killed him. The article, when it was published, sparked a national conversation about medical misinformation and vulnerable populations. I received hundreds of emails from other parents who had similar experiences, who had been preyed upon by people offering miracle cures for their children's conditions. Some had caught it in time. Others, heartbreakingly, had not been so fortunate. One email stood out. It was from a father whose autistic daughter had died after being subjected to a bleach-based treatment promoted in similar online groups. He thanked me for speaking out and shared his own story of how desperate parents could be led astray by people who claimed to have answers that the medical establishment was hiding. His daughter, Lily, had been 7 years old, just 2 years older than Michael. I started corresponding with other families affected by medical misinformation, and gradually the idea for a foundation began to take shape. Not just a website or a support group, but an organized effort to combat dangerous cures while advocating for better medical care for children with developmental differences. I wanted to create something that addressed both sides of the equation, the system failures that made families vulnerable and the predators who exploited that vulnerability. The trial date approached faster than I expected. 6 months after that terrible night in the hospital, I sat in a courtroom facing my mother for the first time since I'd screamed at her to leave Michael's hospital room. She looked older, her usually perfect hair showing grey roots, her face drawn and pale. But her expression remained defiant, and I could see in her eyes that she still believed she had been right. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically, Michael's medical records showing his devastating decline, expert testimony about the effects of activated charcoal when used as my mother had used it, screenshots from the online group where she had bragged about increasing the doses when Michael showed signs of detox. The water bottle, tested and confirmed to contain dangerous levels of activated charcoal, enough to bind with almost all nutrients in his system. When my mother took the stand in her own defense, she doubled down on her beliefs. She spoke passionately about the autism epidemic and the conspiracy to suppress natural cures. She claimed that Michael's hospitalization was proof that the toxins were leaving his system, and that if I had just let her continue the treatment, he would have been cured within months. The jury's faces showed their horror and disbelief as she spoke. I testified on the second day, describing Michael's symptoms, my attempts to get medical help, and the devastating moment when I realized what my mother had done. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a negligent mother who had missed obvious signs, but Prosecutor Chen quickly shut that down, introducing evidence of my multiple doctor visits and meticulous documentation of Michael's condition. The hardest moment came when they showed photos of Michael at his sickest, compared to photos from before my mother began her treatment. The transformation was shocking, from a healthy, bright-eyed boy to a skeletal shadow of himself. Several jury members wiped away tears, and I had to leave the courtroom briefly to compose myself. Dr. Patel testified about the medical implications of my mother's actions, explaining in clear, accessible terms how activated charcoal had systematically starved Michael's body. She also testified about his ongoing recovery, the therapies he still needed, the developmental delays caused by months of malnutrition. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding, she said firmly. This was sustained, intentional administration of a substance that prevented a child's body from absorbing nutrients. The fact that the defendant believed she was helping doesn't change the medical reality of what she did. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all charges, aggravated child abuse, practicing medicine without a license, and reckless endangerment. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, addressed my mother directly during sentencing. "Your actions nearly killed a child," she said. "Your refusal to acknowledge the harm you've caused, even now, shows a dangerous lack of insight. This court sentences you to 8 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 6 years. Additionally, you are permanently barred from any unsupervised contact with minor children, including your grandson." My mother's reaction was explosive. She screamed about injustice, about how the system was persecuting her for trying to save her grandson. As court officers led her away, she turned to me with wild eyes. "You'll see," she shouted. "When he's older and still suffering, you'll realize I was right. I was saving him, and you stopped me." Her words echoed in the courtroom long after she was gone. I left the courthouse feeling hollow rather than vindicated. There was no satisfaction in seeing my mother sentenced to prison, only a deep sadness that it had come to this. The woman who had raised me, who had taught me to tie my shoes and baked cookies for my school fundraisers, had become someone capable of slowly poisoning her own grandchild while believing she was saving him. Michael was waiting for me at his teacher, Ms. Jennifer's house. She had become a close friend through all of this, one of the few people who had believed something was wrong from the beginning. Michael was in her backyard, carefully constructing an elaborate dinosaur habitat in her sandbox, completely absorbed in his imaginary prehistoric world. "Mummy," he called when he saw me, abandoning his dinosaurs to run into my arms. His gait was still slightly unsteady, his coordination not quite what it had been before the poisoning, but he was alive and happy and here. I held him tightly, breathing in the little boy's smell of dirt and sunshine and the strawberry shampoo we used for his sensitive scalp. "How did it go?" Jennifer asked quietly, while Michael returned to his dinosaurs. I gave her a brief summary and she squeezed my shoulder supportively. "You did the right thing," she said. "No matter how hard it was, you protected him." But had I? The guilt of not seeing what was happening sooner still ate at me daily. Every therapy appointment to address his lingering deficits, every night he woke with nightmares about bad drinks, every milestone that came later than it should have, all reminded me of my failure to protect him from someone I trusted. The foundation Charlie's Voice, named after the original story but representing all children like Michael, officially launched a year after his hospitalization. What started as a simple website with resources grew into something much larger. We offered webinars for parents about recognizing medical misinformation, worked with pediatricians to develop screening protocols for possible medical abuse, and provided support groups for families navigating complex medical systems with special needs children. One of our most important initiatives was advocating for medical professionals to receive better training in recognizing and treating children with developmental differences. Too many families had stories like mine of legitimate medical concerns dismissed because of a child's diagnosis. We pushed for continuing education that helped doctors distinguish between behavioral manifestations of autism and actual medical symptoms that needed treatment. The response was overwhelming. Within 6 months, we had chapters starting in 12 states, run by parents who had their own stories of near misses or tragedies. We partnered with legitimate autism advocacy organizations to ensure our messaging was clear. Autism didn't need curing, but autistic children deserved proper medical care for actual health issues, and they deserved protection from those who would exploit their parents' concerns. Michael, now 8 years old, continued to thrive despite the lasting effects of his ordeal. His fine motor skills remained slightly delayed, and he tired more easily than his peers, but his spirit was undiminished. His passion for dinosaurs had evolved into a genuine interest in paleontology, and his room looked like a natural history museum, with fossils, books, and carefully labeled drawings covering every surface. He still struggled with the concept of what had happened with his grandmother. His logical mind couldn't reconcile "Grandma loved me" with "Grandma hurt me." And we continued to work with his therapist on processing this complex betrayal. He had developed some food anxieties, particularly around drinks that weren't clear, but we were slowly working through those as well. One afternoon, as I watched him meticulously arranging his dinosaur collection according to geological periods, he looked up at me with those serious eyes that saw the world so differently than most. "Mummy," he said, "why did Grandma think I was broken?" The question took my breath away. We'd never used that word, had been so careful to frame his autism as a difference, not a deficit. I sat down beside him on the floor, choosing my words carefully. "Grandma was confused," I said finally. "She loved you very much, but she had some wrong ideas about autism. She thought it was something that needed to be fixed, instead of understanding that it's just part of who you are, like having brown eyes or being good at remembering dinosaur names." He considered this, his face scrunched in concentration. "But I'm not broken," he said finally, with the certainty that only a child can have. "I'm just Michael." I pulled him into my lap, blinking back tears. "That's exactly right, baby. You're perfect, exactly as you are." He tolerated the hug for a moment before squirming away to return to his dinosaurs. The conversation apparently settled in his mind. 3 years after the trial, I received a letter from my mother. The prison return address made my hands shake as I opened it. 8 pages of justification, of continued insistence that she had been right, that the medical establishment had brainwashed me, that someday I would see the truth. She ended by saying she forgave me for betraying her and hoped I would eventually understand what she had been trying to do. I stood over my kitchen sink that night, lighter in hand, watching her words burn. As the flames consumed her twisted logic and false forgiveness, I made a decision. I would no longer carry the weight of her choices. I had protected my son when it mattered most, had believed him when the system failed us, had fought for him when fighting seemed impossible. That had to be enough. The foundation continued to grow, branching into research funding for better diagnostic tools to help doctors distinguish between autism characteristics and medical symptoms. We funded studies on medical gaslighting of special needs families and developed training programs for healthcare providers. Every family we helped, every child who received proper medical care instead of dangerous cures, felt like a small victory against the darkness that had almost claimed my son. One evening, at a foundation fundraiser, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She had driven 4 hours to attend after reading about our work online. Her daughter, recently diagnosed with ADHD, was being pressured by her ex-mother-in-law to try a natural protocol involving massive doses of vitamins and supplements. Our website had given her the information and courage to refuse, to protect her child from potential harm. "You saved her," she whispered, gripping my hands. "You saved us both." I thought of Michael, healthy and happy, at home with his respite caregiver, probably reorganizing his fossil collection for the 100th time. I thought of all the children who wouldn't suffer because their parents had access to real information instead of dangerous misinformation. I thought of my mother, sitting in a prison cell, still convinced of her righteousness. "We saved each other," I told her, and meant it. Because that's what this had become, a community of families protecting one another, sharing our stories so others wouldn't walk the same dark path. We couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the harm already done, but we could light the way forward, one family at a time. Michael is 10 now, thriving in 4th grade with appropriate supports and accommodations. He reads at a high school level, though his handwriting still shows the effects of those months of malnutrition. He's made a friend, Connor, who shares his love of prehistoric creatures, and they spend hours creating elaborate scenarios with their dinosaur collections. He still has autism, still sees the world through his unique lens, still needs support in various areas of his life, but he's alive, he's healthy, and he's exactly who he's meant to be. Sometimes when I watch him concentrate on a particularly challenging puzzle or light up while explaining the difference between the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, I'm overwhelmed by how close we came to losing him. Not to his autism, which was never a disease to be cured, but to someone who claimed to love him while slowly poisoning him in pursuit of an impossible and unnecessary goal. The foundation now operates in 30 states, with an online presence that reaches families worldwide. We've partnered with major medical institutions to improve care for neurodivergent patients and successfully lobbied for legislation making it illegal to advertise or sell certain dangerous autism cures. Every victory feels personal. Every family helped a small redemption for the one I couldn't save from harm in time. I still have nightmares sometimes, still wake up in a cold sweat, remembering the weight of Michael's limp body in my arms that terrible night. The guilt may never fully fade. The what-ifs may always linger at the edges of my consciousness. But in the daylight, watching my son thrive despite everything he's endured, working to protect other children from similar harm, I found a purpose born from our pain. The last time I saw my mother was at the trial. She's eligible for parole in another 2 years, and I've been told she plans to request a hearing. Part of me hopes she's found clarity in prison, that she's come to understand the harm she caused, but the larger part knows that's unlikely. The online groups she belonged to have labelled her a martyr, a grandmother persecuted for trying to save her grandchild from the autism industry. She has supporters who write to her, who reinforce her delusions, who ensure she'll probably never accept responsibility for nearly killing Michael. But that's no longer my burden to carry. My focus is on the present and future, on the beautiful, brilliant boy who sees the world in ways that constantly amaze me, on the families who reach out for help navigating their own challenging journeys, on building a world where different doesn't mean less than, where medical care isn't contingent on neurotypicality, where love doesn't come with conditions that demand changing who someone fundamentally is. As I write this, Michael is at his desk, meticulously drawing a Pachycephalosaurus with the focused intensity he brings to everything he loves. The afternoon sun streams through his window, highlighting the concentration on his face, the slight tremor in his hand that's barely noticeable now, but reminds me how far we've come. He's humming softly, a repetitive tune that helps him focus, a beautiful autism trait that no one will ever convince me needs fixing. "Mom," he calls without looking up, "did you know that Pachycephalosaurus means thick-headed lizard?" But some scientists think they might not have used their heads for fighting after all. New evidence suggests their skulls couldn't handle the impact. I tell him I didn't know that, and he launches into an enthusiastic explanation of dinosaur skull structure that will probably last through dinner. This is our life now. Not the life I imagined when I first held my newborn son, not the life my mother tried to force through her dangerous interventions, but a life built on acceptance, understanding, and fierce protection of who Michael truly is. He's not a puzzle to be solved or a condition to be cured. He's a 10-year-old boy who loves dinosaurs, struggles with handwriting, gives the best hugs when he's in the mood for physical contact, and sees the world in brilliant, beautiful color, where others might see only black and white. The Foundation's motto, displayed prominently on our website and materials, came from something Michael said during one of his therapy sessions. Different isn't broken. 3 simple words that capture everything I wish my mother had understood, everything I want the world to recognize. Our children don't need fixing. They need understanding, support, appropriate medical care when actually ill, and protection from those who would harm them in the name of help. As the sun sets on another ordinary day in our extraordinary life, I'm filled with gratitude for the small miracles. Michael, healthy and happy. Families finding support before it's too late. A network of parents and professionals working together to ensure no child suffers what Michael endured. It's not the happy ending wrapped in a bow that stories usually provide, because this isn't an ending at all. It's a continuing journey of healing, advocacy, and hope. Tomorrow, Michael will wake up still autistic, still dealing with the lingering effects of his grandmother's poisoning, still needing support and understanding in a world not built for minds like his. But he'll also wake up loved, protected, and valued for exactly who he is. And that, in the end, is the greatest victory of all. The water bottle sits in an evidence locker somewhere, a black reminder of how love, twisted by ignorance, can become a weapon. But in our home, water is just water. Love is unconditional, and different is just another word for unique. We've built our life on that foundation, and no amount of activated charcoal can ever poison that truth. As I close Michael's dinosaur encyclopedia and tuck him into bed, he looks up at me with those same eyes that first stole my heart 10 years ago. "Love you, Mom," he says in his matter-of-fact way, already half asleep. "Love you too, baby," I whisper back, smoothing his hair that's finally grown back thick and healthy. Exactly as you are. And in that moment, in the quiet of his room surrounded by prehistoric guardians, I know we've won. Not the battle I thought we were fighting, but the war for Michael's right to exist as himself. My mother tried to cure him, the medical system tried to dismiss him, but Michael, in all his autistic glory, survived them both. And that's a victory worth everything we've endured to achieve it.